In this group two, my co-moderator is Hannah. She is 12 years old, and she comes from Scotland. She's a member of the Children's Advisory Team, and I have to say that this is not her first participation in the day of general discussion. She was here 2 years ago. This morning we will have 3 dialogues, and they will be about the first one will be national protection measures for children as human rights defenders with Mr. Vincent Pluton from the International Service for Human Rights, and Kita, whom we have listened to at the plenary this morning, young defender from Liberia. The second discussion we'll have on the participation of children in public affairs, freedom of assembly and association with Olivier de Frouvy, UN Human Rights Committee, and Luis, he is 17 from Peru, and Eyol, he is 15 and he's from Ethiopia. The third one and the last will be children, human rights defenders in armed conflict and humanitarian situation with Cecilia Jimenez Demeri, and excuse my pronunciation, she, from the UN Special Rapporteur on Internally Displaced Persons. We have Sandra Camila, she is 15, from Colombia, and Haya, she's also 15, she's from Syria. Our rapporteur for this group, for this working group, is CRC member Mr. Benyam Mezmour, together with Nicholas Schulz from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. At the end of the day, they will present a preliminary set of conclusions coming out from the debate within this working group. Now, I'll pass the floor to Hannah, and she will be giving you some organizational points for discussion.
So after each dialogue, the floor will be open to all participants. Please raise your hand if you'd like to take the floor and say your name and take one of your collaborations. Please take that you'll associate a maximum of 2 minutes to talk. If beyond this time, I'll have to interrupt you. Make sure you tell us your name and where you're from. Thank you.
So now I invite our first speaker, Mr. Vincent Pluton, please.
Thank you. Should I start with a statement or questions?
You will have the dialogue with Kita.
Thank you very much. Good morning, all. My name is Vincent Pluton. I represent the International Service for Human Rights, and I'm from France. So I'd like to start with a question to you, Keita. I was very impressed and very interested to hear about your experience earlier this morning, including the situation that you have faced as a child human rights defender. You've spoken about the threats that you have received in exercising your rights, in claiming your rights, in asking for the fulfillment of your rights. So the question I would like to ask you in the context of this dialogue is, what do you think, what is required? What sort of protection would be required? You yourself, again, in light of your experience, what is needed, and in the context of your country, what could make a difference for children who, like you, are human rights defenders and are being threatened for exercising your rights?
I think what we will need in the context of my country is a national law, a legislation. So back in 2011, but then I was a member of the Liberia Children's Parliament, which is a national body of child rights advocates and activists. We pushed for the children's law for Liberia to have a legislation, on children's rights, and in that law we stipulated that these are the way children should be protected, children who voice out their concerns. So what I think that is very important, and I feel every country needs it, in as much as you are a signatory to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. I think we need a kind of national legislation that very well spell out the rights of children, as well as talk about child human rights defenders, because there are countries who have signed the UNCRC, they ratified, of course, the US being the only exception right now. Having the UNCRC alone would not make it to be domesticated, to be nationalized. So what we do need is a kind of national legislation that spell out the rights of children in that country's context, as well as means by which we can defend children who say what they see, who report cases, or who are advocates in their own different areas and different perspectives. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Keita. I think it's a very interesting point that you are making on the need for specific legislation. Are you aware of the countries in Africa which have adopted specific legislation on human rights defenders?
I don't know of any country that has adopted legislations, or whether it's the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. I don't know those countries, because my country has not signed nor ratified the UN Convention on Human Rights Defenders. But what I do know, there are other UN resolutions that my country has signed. For instance, the UN Declaration on Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We have the UNCRC. But what we do need are practical steps. We need actions. We need, because we were one of the few countries, the first few countries that signed this, that rectified and signed the UNCRC, but then its provisions are held in breach, meaning they are not implemented, or most of it are not implemented. And then we have our own children's law. For instance, in the children's law, we talk about the need for the rights of children to be taught in universities and colleges and high schools around the country, but that has not been done. So I don't know of any countries. I know in Africa, perhaps they will say, why should we protect human rights defenders, child human rights defenders, when they are exposing us? So that is a subject of debate. But again, we need it, and this can only happen if the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child begins to put pressures on government. Sometimes we sometimes shut out our tonsils. I'm 20 years old now. Since I was 9 years old, I have been talking for children's rights. And believe me, I sometimes feel hopeless. I sometimes feel disappointed. I sometimes feel discouraged that things are not changing at all, because we have governments that are bent on distorting the truth, and sometimes they will not listen to young people. So if pressures can come from the committee and other bodies in the UN and say, this has to be done. If you don't do this, these are the consequences you're going to face. I think we'll be doing something. We'll be going somewhere.
Thanks, Keita. Again, two very important points that you're making on the need to implement national laws, and on the role of the committee. And I wanted to share a very recent experience with you on the very important role of the committee in the protection of children human rights defenders. I have just returned from Guinea. I was in Guinea until yesterday, and Guinea is possibly the fourth country in Africa which will adopt a national law on the protection of human rights defenders. The first three countries that have done so are Côte d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, and Mali. And there's a draft law which is currently being discussed in Guinea, which has gathered the inputs from the contributions from human rights defenders. Do you know how many international bodies have recommended that Guinea should have specific protection for human rights defenders? Only two bodies. The Universal Periodic Review, Uruguay, made a recommendation that the protection of human rights defenders should be enhanced in this country, and the other is the Committee on the Rights of the Child. And I can tell you that in our national advocacy in Guinea, we were able to use these recommendations from the CRC to move forward the agenda on the protection of human rights defenders. So we're able to essentially make the point that a law on the protection of human rights defenders would comply with that recommendation from that committee. And we were also able to suggest that this law, the Guinea draft law on the protection of human rights defenders, should contain a specific provision on children human rights defenders. So we're not yet at the stage where the law obviously is adopted. Guinea is going to be reviewed by the UN Human Rights Committee in 2 weeks' time. So we hope that the Human Rights Committee will take this opportunity to request or encourage the government to adopt this law, and perhaps that Guinea could become the first, I believe, possibly the first country in the world that would have a law on the protection of human rights defenders, which would specifically address the protection of children human rights defenders. And on that point, perhaps just to, if I may, just to give another background to that information. Earlier this year, in New York, a consultation took place which gathered the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders, Mr. Voss, was here earlier today, and chairs or vice chairs of all UN treaty bodies, which the Committee on the Rights of the Child is part of. They adopted a joint declaration which highlights how human rights defenders are important for the fulfillment, for the implementation of these standards. It's a groundbreaking joint statement, because it's the first joint statement by representatives of all treaty bodies and the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders. But there's something which is very interesting in that joint statement. There is a specific provision, and that is thanks to the participation of CRC, there is a specific provision on the role, on the need for protection of children human rights defenders. So it was very important, of course, for us to make sure that children human rights defenders would be reflected, integrated, and receive protection in that joint statement. And of course, the fact that this statement has been endorsed by representatives of all treaty bodies and the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders now enable us, in our national advocacy work, like in Guinea, to be encouraging specific provisions on protection of human rights defenders.
One of the things I think that we also have to look at is the need for children human rights defenders to be sort of like invited by the committee during its maybe regular sittings. So we do not always have to wait for these kind of events, this kind of gathering, maybe that happens once every 2, 3, 4, 5 years, to invite children. So, for instance, I think state countries, member state report to the committee on the status of children, and likewise international organizations working in different countries do the same. So it would be very much important and very urgent at this time if the committee can begin to request reports, maybe 5 pages, 6 pages, any amount of pages from child human rights defenders themselves. Because sometimes government tend to present their country as though everything is okay, as though the lives of children are being improved, as though they have the mechanisms. But if we can have children themselves making reports to the committee saying that these are our concerns, these are the things we've craved for, or these are the situations we are faced with, then we will be going somewhere. But that way the committee will not have to rely on just governments alone or what international organizations say. So, for instance, if you come and ask me what perspective do you have with regards to the situations in my country, I would tell you different story from what my government would tell you, as well as what maybe international organizations that Save the Children plan, or maybe even Child Rights Connect case, what they would tell you, because those are organizations and they tend to not write reports that will try to maybe blame the government sometimes. So they try to make it a little bit moderate. But if you ask me, I will be able to give you a full picture of what children human rights defenders face. I'll be able to write it and I will give it to you, and I will provide all the list of children who have been threatened. So I hope the committee can look at that, where children themselves can begin to report to the committee.
I think that's an excellent point, and you're actually you're prompting me to think over the past few years, I've been engaging with different treaty bodies. I don't recall seeing the participation of minors, of children, in any other treaty body than the Committee on the Rights of the Child. Why is that? Why is that? That's a very good question. We know that the one committee that makes more recommendations on human rights defenders is the Human Rights Committee. Why? Because the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights protects the right to freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, freedoms that are essential for human rights defenders. Yet, I do not recall ever seeing children engaging with the Human Rights Committee. So I think your point is very important that children human rights defenders need to see all opportunities, avail all opportunities, not just with the Committee on the Rights of the Child, but also with other mechanisms, including, for example, the Human Rights Committee or other UN mechanisms that have a very important role in terms of the protection of human rights defenders. I am convinced by that through an engagement, through a better engagement of children and children human rights defenders with these other bodies, there will be an increase in jurisprudence, there will be increased protection from not just the Committee on the Rights of the Child, but other mechanisms on children human rights defenders.
Peter, would you like to add any question?
Yeah, so Vincent, I see that you work for the International Service for Human Rights. So I would like to know, with your experience in working in Africa, I don't know if it's just Guinea or in other countries. By the way, I do know that Guinea do not have a very good record when it comes to human rights. Mm-hmm. What are the challenges you faced? What are the situations of human rights defenders in general, not specifically children, but human rights defenders in general, in Guinea specifically?
Okay. So one of the issues on which we work in Africa and other regions, we try to promote and support the adoption of national laws for the protection of human rights defenders. You made a very important point. You said having a law is important, but the law doesn't mean anything so long as it's not implemented. And we always bear that in mind. While we work on the adoption of laws, we also try to think of how these laws will be implemented, because again, those laws will be meaningless if they're not implemented. So much of our work focuses on adoption of these national laws. Like I said, 3 countries have already adopted that kind of laws. In at least one of them, which is Ivory Coast, which was the first to adopt such a law in Africa back in 2014, we're seeing the positive benefits of this law. We're seeing that human rights defenders feel safer. Of course, it doesn't mean that attacks and assaults and threats against them have stopped overnight, but they feel that they can use that law to claim for their right and have more protection as human rights defenders. One challenge, you were asking about the challenges, one challenge that we also see, especially in this region, is that governments often will either use the process of adopting a new law on the protection of human rights defenders to curtail the space and the operations of human rights defenders. So instead of having a law that will truly protect human rights defenders, sometimes we have seen draft laws that, on the contrary, restrict the work of human rights defenders, and of course that's very problematic. So that's one kind of situation that we see, and a similar, related but different situation that we have also faced in countries, for example, like Sierra Leone, is that on the one hand, national executives or national human rights defenders or the parliament may be moving ahead with the process of adopting a law to protect human rights defenders, while at the same time other laws, other regulations that relate to civil society space are actually cracking down on civil society. The laws make it very difficult for civil society, including children's organizations, to be operating freely, to cite...
Excuse me, sorry, I need to ask you to finish.
Okay. Thank you.
She's very strict.
Yes, that is very, very strict. Thanks for that. I think I can pretty much stop here. Just to say that, perhaps to conclude, when we have to remain very vigilant, and when countries go down the path of adopting a law for protection of human rights defenders, it has to protect them, not to restrict their protection. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so the floor is open for question and answer now. You've got 2 minutes maximum for your questions.
And she is very strict. I think. So, so what we'll do, just to save on time, we'll take 3 questions. Before you speak, can you please tell us your name, where you're from, and we'll take 3 questions at a time and answer them later on. Thank you.
Yes?
Hi. So my name is Michael Chalmers. I'm from the Scottish Government, and I had a question really for Keita, but it builds on some of the things which Vincent was talking about. I was speaking to a colleague about the idea that the framework for protecting children's rights, legal frameworks, are essential and necessary, but they may not be sufficient in order to realise the rights that we're trying to protect. And I was really struck by the way that you put it, Keita, which was the difference between what's on paper and reality. And I wondered if you could say a bit about what you think is needed in very difficult circumstances to bridge that gap, to connect between what we want to provide for in the frameworks and what actually happens in reality.
Keita, can you wait?
Okay.
We'll take 2 more questions. Any more questions from the floor? Yes. Your name, please.
Okay.
Bonjour, monsieur. Je suis Sido Nourou. Je viens du...
Thank you very much. I come from Niger. And I have 2 questions. My first question is addressed to Keita. Thank you very much for everything you're doing. And I'd like to ask you if sometimes you look into the specific situation of handicapped children and the tremendous discrimination these children are facing. And my second question concerns legislation already adopted in some countries in order to protect children. Is it possible for handicapped children to take part and defend their rights? Thank you.
Yes, please.
Bonjour, Maria Langola. J'aimerais...
Hello, Maria from Angola. I have a question addressed to Mr. Plotin concerning adoption of national legislation. I'd like to know how you can explain the fact that there haven't been more the countries adopting legislation in order to protect human rights defenders. You mentioned only a few countries, 3 or 4. How come no more?
Can we take a 4th one? Is it okay? Keita and Vincent? All right, so we can take the last question for this round.
My name is Cindy Blackstock. I'm from Canada. My question is with regard to children's access to human rights enforcement measures, both domestically and internationally. What recommendations do you have for us for children to be able to file their own human rights complaints, to testify in systemic human rights complaints, to get representation in human rights complaints so that they themselves can hold government, state actors, and others accountable for violations of children's rights?
Thank you very much. And the floor is yours, Vincent and Keita.
All right. To begin with the 4th question, I think what we do need for children themselves to be involved into reporting their own cases, like I said earlier, is the need for a child, just as we have, for instance, let's say a UN youth envoy. Can we have a child's envoy? I know it sounds big, right? Can we have somebody in the UN, a child, who will be reminding leaders in the UN about child human rights violations? And because we have this UN Youth Envoy, of course, somebody may say, well, that office captures children, but when you are 18 below, it's a very special case. So can we have a child who will be able to, who will be a global face for children and be able to remind the UN or remind the committee or any other committee in the UN that these are child human rights violations and these are the things that we have to do. And so that mechanism has to be put in place if only we will want progress. And then the second question is, do I work with disabled children? Yes, I do. Though the issue of discrimination against children with disabilities in my country is high, that is why I refuse to stand up for just, if you go to my country, I'm known for standing up against violence against children, but then I realized that there are too many issues affecting children, and there are children with disabilities, there are children, deaf and dumb children. They need attention, and we have to say something about it. So I do work with children with disabilities. We some years back we pushed for the National Commission, the establishment of the National Commission on People with Disabilities, and under that commission we continue to recommend that there should be a young person who represents the interests of children with disabilities. And over the last few years, I've also called for the need not to tend to segregate children from disabled children from children who are not disabled, because it makes them feel discriminated, they feel abused, whenever they appear in public, and then they have special programs for them, and while their colleagues are doing something else. So I think governments will have to look at that aspect, and throughout my advocacy, I've always stressed the need to protect children with disabilities. So what can be done to bridge the gap between something that is on paper and taking action? I think is the need for more actions for those of us who are into human rights circles. So, for instance, how I do mine is through protest. There are national laws that call for the protection of children, and whenever I see that aspect has been ignored, I take action together with my colleagues. So we've had protests, we've had marches, we've had petitioning ceremonies. We go to our legislature and demand that they take action. We have the beautiful laws, we have everything written, everything that we do need. But what we need is action, and how I do it is to make them to act by acting myself. So when we ourselves begin to say actions begin with ourselves, and we begin to take actions. So for instance, I do not wait for an organization to go into the community and look for a rape case, for instance. I myself go into communities and look for rape cases and bring it to the attention of the national government. Because if we leave everything with our governments, they will tend to hide everything. They will not want to say the facts. And so we ourselves, who we are involved, who are localized, we have to go into the communities ourselves and begin to take actions. And then when government is not paying attention, we also remind them that these are their responsibilities and these are the things we need to do. And lastly, say why are there so many laws? Small laws. There are not enough laws, protection laws. I do think the reason is simple. Why would I have protect Johnson when Johnson always speak against me? So that is the case with most countries. They tend not to adopt national laws to protect human rights defenders, child human rights defenders, because these children are saying the facts. They are saying the truth. So in my country, I have many people in government who are either accused of rape or they have been convicted of rape, of sexual violence, but yet they are in government. For instance, I lost my father when I was 5 years old during the Liberian Civil War, and I have been involved in the campaigns to call for the establishment of a war crimes court in Liberia to prosecute those who were involved in the war. So how do I expect that kind of government to legislate a law to protect me for speaking out against people who are part of the government? So that only happens when international community or international organizations get involved and put pressure on the government. So I feel that's the reason there are no laws or small laws to protect human rights defenders, because government themselves don't want us. They want us to feel unsafe. It will be good. It will be a good thing if I get a threat and I want to talk, right? Because government say, yeah, at least he's afraid of the situations. But again, I continue to talk. So, yeah, I think that's the reason. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Keita. And I think you should join the CRC, the Committee on the Rights of the Child, because these are some of the points that we constantly address and recommend state parties to the convention to apply, actually. Thank you very much. And I think that part of the question from the lady from Angola was directed to you, Vincent. If you have anything to say on that.
Yes, I can only hope that there will be more such laws, because indeed we need more such laws. But as the point has already been made, it's one thing to have a law and it's another to implement it. And of course, we hope that more laws will be implemented, which, as in the case of Guinea, may contain specific provisions on the protection of children human rights defenders. And of course, we very much look forward to the committee developing a jurisprudence in that regard and making recommendations in that regard. If I may, I would just like to add, and I promise, Hannah, I'll be less than 2 minutes. I would just add 2 very quick points to questions on disability, because that's a very important question. Peut-être je vais répondre en français au monsieur du Niger, pour préciser que la loi de protection des défenseurs.
To make it clear that the law for the protection of defenders in Mali has a specific provision concerning those with disabilities. There's similar a draft law in Guinea. There's a specific provision for people with disabilities.
Thanks for raising the point on litigation. I think it's so important. Now that we have the 3rd optional protocol to CRC, which provides the tools for children to seek justice, to take their cases to the committee and seek reparation, let's make use of it. I was appalled to see that at least 3 cases of reprisals were referred to the Committee on the Rights of the Child. Reprisals in the context of engaging with the committee. When possible, I think those cases should definitely be brought up under the 3rd optional protocol.
Thank you very much. And we are on the 2nd round of questions on this topic. Do you have any more questions for the 2 speakers? Yes, please.
Merci. Sœur Julienne, je viens du Gabon.
Thank you, Sir Julien from Gabon. I work in the Arc-en-Ciel organization. It was very interesting hearing these 2 presentations. And I'd like to add that it's very difficult to apply what has been developed in terms of laws to protect children, because in Gabon, we are faced with a lot of mistreatment, kidnapped children, street children, children in prisons, even at a very young age. And when you look at the cause for this imprisonment, perhaps it's mere theft of a cell phone. And it's very important to be able to defend children everywhere and to have your support. Those of you who've already embarked in this direction, can you help us so that we can put these texts in practice, even though it's very difficult to work with the state?
Who would like to answer this question? I could not see any. So I guess all is well and clear. So, Vincent?
Si j'ai bien compris la question.
If I've correctly understood your question, actually you were referring to support to organizations protecting children in their interaction with the state. That was the purpose of your question, right? Yes. Yes. Well, actually, the comments to this question or reply would be somewhat difficult. It all depends on the countries. What we do notice in our work is that somebody referred to Venezuela earlier today, and we've seen that it's absolutely impossible to go and sit at a table with the government representatives and organizations representing children and protection of children. In some countries at the present stage, it's absolutely impossible. Well, elsewhere, it is possible to have this interaction with the presence of both government actors and independent organizations. And often we are told that international organizations can certainly play a role and try to accompany this interaction and this dialogue. Sometimes it can take place here in Geneva, in this very building. I've seen interaction between representatives of the government in Burundi and local actors when it was absolutely impossible to do this in the capital, in Bujumbura. And sometimes it's absolutely impossible to speak up about violations when you're in your own country. But sometimes it can take place right here. And in the case of Venezuela, when there was a consideration of the situation in Venezuela by the Human Rights Committee, then there can be some dialogue and some interaction here. But sometimes it cannot physically be done in the country. But this interaction is absolutely essential. And what we've seen in countries that when you have no communication between civil society and civil actors and the government, you cannot make any headway. This dialogue is absolutely essential, and it must take place between civil society and the government and authorities, so that the recommendations, and specifically recommendations of the Committee on the Rights of the Child, can be taken up. We know that UNICEF and other international organizations can also support the implementation of recommendations in coordination, cooperation with the authorities where this is possible and feasible. I hope this was an adequate reply to your question. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Dialogue, very informative indeed. And just to remind those who are following us online that we can receive some questions if you have. So for those who have just joined us online. And now we go to our second session, which is on the participation of children in public affairs, freedom of assembly and association. So the floor is yours, the three speakers. So who would like to start? Olivier? Oui?
Merci beaucoup. D'abord,
thank you very much. And I'd like to say that I'm extremely happy to be part of this event today. I would certainly like to thank and congratulate the committee and Connect for this undertaking. Sometimes discussions in the UN are more of a formal nature, and I'm most interested in interaction and interactive discussion. And this is a model in a way, and we should try to carry this forward and have this type of interaction and dialogue so that as many voices as possible can be heard. We have as our subject freedom of assembly and association. Now, it's more evident because it is included in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. All children are have this right, but it's less evident when it comes to public affairs, because when you think of this, you think of the of voting rights, but in most countries, children do not have access to the vote. They cannot be elected, but actually, freedom of assembly and association is much broader in scope, and actually there has been some written work on this, since it covers all deliberations covering public affairs, also participation in consultative and decision-making assemblies, and also the mere influence which can be exercised in the public domain. And the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, which is not well not well known. In Article 8, it says specifically that children can take part and can submit proposals on the improvement and the proper functioning of the system of the functioning of the state. And in the Declaration of Human Rights, there's no restriction whatsoever in terms of age. And it was already indicated that children who participate and express themselves are human rights defenders and should be recognized as such and benefit from the purposes of the Declaration. We have children here with us today. They already have tremendous experience, whether it's the case of Oyel or Luis. Oyel, on his side, took part in the work of a club in his school and takes part in a number of activities trying to fight against violence against children or children trafficking. And Luis takes part in a movement called Montauk in Peru, which is a movement of adolescents and working children and Christian workers. And he works on the sexual and reproductive rights more broadly. What we're interested in, and actually my specific question would be first to ask them to reflect on their experience, what it means for them to exercise freedom of assembly and freedom of association, and more specifically, how they see their participation in public affairs as a way to achieve objectives which are theirs, fight against the work by children or fight for freedoms of children, and what type of obstacles they've had to overcome, perhaps with a concrete examples and what they've been encountering, how they embarked on this avenue, and how they've overcome their obstacles. Perhaps who would like to be the first to speak? Luis or Oyel?
Okay, my name is Yoel. I am from Ethiopia. I am one of the young leaders, and I will be talking about how children can engage in a campaign for ending violence against children, and what is the contribution of children for ending violence against children. So, in my country, there are two things: the urban and the rural. In the rural area, there are too many bad cultural behaviors that are happening to the child, and in the urban, it is opposite of the rural. So, in the rural area, it is very violated for the child, and the rural area are much not good for the child. because their parents don't listen to them and making them for doing heavy things. So I am here because I want to end this kind of things for my country, child, and for all world children. And yeah, I'm very happy for being in the United Nations and talking about all the problems of all children who are suffering in the world. Yeah, and Luis, can.
Bueno, buenos días con todas.
Good morning to all of you. My name is Luis Gustavo. I would like to first thank you for providing this space that allows for different children of different parts of the world to be involved in this discussion. I am 16. I have also been a worker in the past, but I also go to school. I'm in my last year of high school, and I would also like to go to university. I have different goals for my future, and I've also applied to Amnesty International. I have been a human rights defender since I am 10 years old. However, not in the sense that I was reaffirming myself as a human rights defender, but because that is when I started realizing what rights I had as a child. At school, for instance, they told me I had the right to receive food and to go to school, but I did not know that I was also a citizen in the sense that I could contribute and participate in public affairs. We live in a society in which our education, and allow me to start with education because it constitutes most of our lives as children and youth, all of this is characterized by individualistic factors, materialistic issues, and to start thinking about how much we have to earn in the future, and just mainly to get a job in the future that will pay off well. We are not aware of what the real concept of development is, if that is just to getting rich despite everyone else, or development respecting everybody else. So in Peru, I don't know if there is anybody with Amazon descendants here, but either way, I would like to talk in the name of all the children in my country, because we need to have a protagonist participation in all spaces. That means that we can work as community, as a collective, not only children, teenagers, but also adults. People that have different abilities. All of them, all of us need to belong to this community and be involved in it and have a horizontal type of collaboration. From my experience, it has been very difficult because the doors are closed to us simply by the fact of us being children, or by being indigenous, by being girls, because of being trans or homosexuals. Because those are the vulnerable peoples and communities that are not listened to. And everything is very self-centered. And adults usually have the last say and do not allow us to have our own. I work on, as we were saying, in health and reproductive rights, and it is crucial to have this information enter the schools. And why is that? Why is it that it is so difficult that these informations do not reach the schools? Because the adults are not insisting on these issues to be heard, and we are not heard as children. Also, on the right to association, we have the right to association, but how many of us really have that right? Or how many of our countries, states, or governments are making enough efforts for our participation to be clear and manifest if even we do not know that we have the right to express our opinions and to the right to association, we will not be able to make this crucial contribution to our society, and therefore we will be manipulated by adults or by other people. That is why we need these rights to be recognized, for us to be valued and taken into account. If you have any questions, it will be my pleasure to answer them. Either way, thank you so much for providing us the opportunity to speak to you and for you to hear what we have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And now Olivier would like to ask some questions.
Oui, merci. Peut-être une question.
Yes, thank you. Actually, we had a talk with Luis, which was most interesting. Actually, there was something very interesting that came out in his words. He said, an adult situation, and indeed we're often in a patriarchal society, but we don't often recognize that we're also an adult-centered society, and we should give a greater recognition to the interests of children, and I think this is something we should remember, and perhaps for the two of you with this excellent report, really excellent report. I'd like to congratulate the authors of this report, which is extremely well done. There's an obstacle here in terms of participation, insofar as children do not feel they are taken seriously. They are not taken seriously, and I'd like to ask you, in your experience, have you felt that you were not taken seriously, and what did you do to try to combat this attitude, the fact that adults do not seem to take young people seriously? Do you have any specific examples in your recent experience that you could share with us? To tell us how you try to overcome this difficulty of not being taken seriously.
Okay, I don't have my own story, but I have other children's story. In my country, I have been working on my school for ending violence against children, and we do drama and write a speech and a poem for making the other children's more confidential, and for making their mental to be happy, and for making them to do well on their work. So in Addis Ababa, we were in African Union Convention, and I was talking about sexual abuse in our country, sexual abuse and FGM. FGM mainly in Ethiopia. FGM, it is a culture, a bad culture, but they believe that if a girl is not circumcised, she will not be honest to her husband, and she will have sex with other guy, and if she don't want to be circumcised, she will be lonely, and they are going to be hate her. So, and other is sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is commonly in the urban area, and the big guy is forcing a small child for having sex with him. So I try my best for ending these kind of things in the African Union Convention, and there were other children from many countries. From Ethiopia, we were 4. And two from South Sudan and 1 from Uganda, and they were talking about other types of violences that are happening on children, and I did my best for doing these kind of things. And in my school, I did like doing a drama and write a speech and making the audiences very entertained about the children's or like that. Yeah.
Thank you. Luis?
Okay. Okay. Bueno, un ejemplo concreto primero.
Well, a very concrete example. Well, sometimes we have had some participation in public events, but the authorities want to get us allowed there just to give them a very good image in front of the media. When I was 12, one specific committee wanted to monitor an action we had taken just to create a ludothèque and a library for children that didn't have access to some free time activities. And this place in which this library was going to be built was a dump site, and the budget we had wasn't still allocated to us. So the mayor signed the proposal for the money to be allocated to our project, and 5 years later we haven't yet since this center built. We have the budget already allocated for us, and we have painted this place just for it not to get invaded, not to get taken from us by some other people. So every time we are said we are being taken into account, our actions are not in fact taken into account. We see majors succeeding to other measures, and the actions we took at some point are not being shared with the successors for public spaces.
Thank you very much for sharing your experiences with us. And now I open the floor for more questions. I'm sure you'll be bombarded with questions from the audience. Do we have any children who would like to ask questions? Okay, adults? All right.
Yes. I wanted to ask...
Can you tell us your name?
Yeah. I am Ariadna from Moldova, and I'm 15 years old. And I wanted to ask that we have heard a lot of stories that adults don't take seriously the children in general. But who was the adults, and if you can give some examples of cases which adults take seriously children and take in account their opinion, and to make sure that this is possible if adults want.
Thank you very much. Second question. Yes, please.
Hello? Just out of curiosity, because it's obviously...
Your name?
Oh, sorry. My name's Robbie. I'm from Scotland. I'm convener for Equality and Human Rights for the Scottish Youth Parliament. Just out of curiosity, obviously it's children participation. What's the people on this topic, what's your views on young people and children getting the right to vote and have a say in their country and the democracy? Because obviously representatives are representing people, and obviously young people do have a say in their country and they are the next generation. So what is your thoughts on young people and children getting to elect their representatives?
Thank you. One last question. I'll take the young man. Yes? Mm-hmm.
Good morning. I am Ellen Molina. I come from the Latin American movement of children and adolescents that work. I came from Paraguay, representing a movement with more than 40 years of experience. We are in more than 19 Latin American countries: Mexico, Guatemala, Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, and Paraguay. I would like to say something that is important for me as a movement, because we struggle for all rights of children and human rights being realized. But our objective is to achieve well-being for children and adolescents, especially for children and adolescents that work. That they use their work, for example, they sell a candy, they clean shoes in public spaces. We defend our right because I am a worker. I work in a rail station and I pay my school and other expenses with this salary. And for me, it's very interesting, this activity in which we are immersed, because you include us as children and adolescents in subjects that are affecting us, because it is always adults, the ones that participate in this kind of activities. And they do not count on the main characters of these stories, which are us, children and adolescents. We are not the problem, we are part of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure we have more time. We're running out of time, in fact. So can I ask you to send your questions online, and then we can attend to them later, please? Thank you so much. Thank you. And lastly, I would like to welcome the new speakers in the following session. And they'll be speaking, or they'll have a dialogue on children human rights defenders in armed conflict and humanitarian situations. So I'll give you the floor if you would like to divide the time between amongst yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all. I would like to thank the Committee on the Rights of the Child for giving us this opportunity. And I have a fantastic all-girl child rights, human rights defender panel, Heya and Sandra Camila beside me. And first of all, Sandra Camila is from Colombia, and she is 16 years old. And Heya is from Syria, and she is 15 years old. This is about them and not me, but maybe just a little bit about me being a special rapporteur on the human rights of IDPs. I have been to many armed conflict situations, and most of the time I deal with humanitarian situations where I have met many children from different countries of the world who are in dire situations because of the extreme abnormality of their lives because of displacement. Sandra Camila and Heya, being from the countries where they are from, will be speaking to us about their situation as children human rights defenders in their community. Sandra lives in her community, and actually Sandra Camila lives in her community in Colombia, and Heya lives in a camp. So I think these are particular situations that we would like to hear from them about. And as well, of course, it's not just a matter of telling us what is the situation of human rights defenders in their communities and their camp, as far as Heya is concerned. But Sandra Camila and Heya, please also tell us about the aspirations of the children human rights defenders that you organize in your particular localities. And do you have any recommendations? Because I would like to recall to everybody that this session is about the responsibilities of the state. And I look forward to hearing from you about those two issues. What's the situation of children human rights defenders in your area? And what do you want? What are your aspirations? and including your recommendations to those concerned. I would like to first give the floor to Sandra Camila, who has prepared very thoroughly on these questions. Sandra Camila?
Good afternoon. I'm Sandra Camila. I come from Colombia and I am 16. Well, Colombia is a very beautiful country, pretty much affected by armed conflict, an ongoing conflict for more than 50 years. So, stemming from this conflict, we have seen more than 8,000 victims, and more than 30% of those victims are children or adolescents. There have been some situations as for enforced recruitment that violates many of our rights, rapes against children and adolescents that have created some unwanted pregnancies. And in our territory, we have seen landmines being planted by which children have died from 3 years old to 18. This is tragic. We have seen targeted assassinations and killings that have increased during last month. Some violations of our rights and our family rights, denying us the right to live in freedom and to have a life free from violence. So in the town where I was born and when I grew up, we have seen plenty of these examples I have just mentioned, including the loss of life, very valuable life of my own dear friends and acquaintances. Some of my fellow friends and colleagues have stayed on their own because they have lost both their parents. No work can be good because the well-being of children and adolescents is not taken into account. We get involved forcibly in these conflicts, and the war just undermine our capacity to get astonished by new things that may arrive. Before the situation arose, we used to be happy, but now we are fearful because we can be attacked only because we are leaders and defenders of our own human rights. Starting in the beginning of August, one adolescent human rights defender was assassinated. Kevin from Medellin, a well-known city in Colombia. And in this last month, we have seen 2 more assassinations of adolescent defenders. If they assassinate our leaders, what could happen to us, children that are simply defending our rights? Because being a leader within the communities, it is not an activity only reserved to adults or grown-ups. We children also have voices, and we need to speak up on behalf of others. In our town, a group of children and adolescents have been monitoring the violations of our rights with a transformative approach, thanks to the training we have received from Plan Internacional. We are subjects of rights, and participation cannot be only reserved to adults. We do proposals and do propose things because we want our rights to be respected within our country. But speaking up and getting empowered can be seen as a threat. And additionally, if we are girls and leaders in a very patronizing society, that is male-dominated, we girls are denied the right to speak up just because we are girls. So this situation can make us vulnerable, but our rights promotion is a priority, and we cannot be fearful of speaking up. We need a guarantee to live in dignity, that defending our rights and saying what we think is not seen anymore as a threat, and that nobody is going to be assassinated anymore because they are different. I have some dreams for my town and for my country. I dream that girls and boys are taken into account in decisions that affect us, because sometimes they only hear us just to give themselves some good conscience, but they never take us into account. They never take into account our recommendations. So I also dream with a quality education that will empower us, that will allow us to attend high school and colleges, because sometimes if we stop our studies just before going to college, we are not going to have the opportunity to get more knowledge, to get out of our country, to send the message that we have out of our borders, that we can be human rights defenders. I dream that there will be more investment in some public spaces to develop our capacities and skills, because not all children have the same skills. There are some children that like playing, that like singing, and we should be allowed to participate in places, in public spaces. For some boys and girls, days might be boring, but they need to have some alternatives. I want a life in dignity. I dream of the respect towards our territories and natural resources, peasants, territories and indigenous lands, access to waters. We have plenty of rivers in my country, and many of them are polluted. We don't have access to drinkable water with so many rivers that we have in our territories. I also dream of women and girls not being victims of war just because we are women, because the impacts of war are severely suffered by women. They are the ones whose children are being taken, they get raped, they get widows, they become widows, and they don't have their rights respected. I also dream that remote communities will have the opportunities to live also in dignity. Girls and boys in my country don't want war anymore. We only want reparation and grievances for victims. We want peace agreements to be respected and to continue to be held. We want to live in a country where life is sacred and is respected, because we only have one life. And I would also like to add that some situations threaten us, because Colombia is a country that is in an ongoing peace process with an armed group, but there are some other armed groups that want to take the place of the group that is being disarmed. And sometimes we see deaths of community leaders, and the most disadvantaged places are being targeted. In some cities or villages, special holidays where people is busy in the markets. People get assassinated in the public market. The last person who died in a public market was the father of a girl that was a human rights defender, as I am, and she had to get displaced into another city. She couldn't continue her work in my community just because her father had been assassinated. Thank you.
Sandra Camila, I would like to thank you, muchas gracias, for your rendition of the very different issues that pertain to Colombia. in the situation of human rights defenders and girl human rights defenders, and particularly also your aspirations and recommendations. I now would like to turn to Heya of Syria, who has been living since 2012 in a camp setting. And I look forward to her sharing with us what is the situation of children human rights defenders in the camp where she lives, and what are your aspirations, Heya, for children human rights defenders, and what would be your recommendations? Heya?
شكرا سيليسيا وشكرا للحضور.
Thank you, Cecilia, and thank you all for coming.
باسمي وباسم لاجئين مخيم الزعتري نشكركم لإعطائي فرصة تمثيل جميع الأطفال المدافعين بمجتمعي.
On my behalf and behalf of all the refugees in Zaatari camp, we thank you for giving me the opportunity to represent all children human rights defenders in my community.
أنا من سوريا عايشة بمخيم بالأردن من 2012.
I'm from Syria. I've been living in a camp in Jordan as a refugee since 2012.
صار اليوم كثير نقاشات عن حماية وتمكين الأطفال المدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان.
There has been many discussions during the day about children empowerment and protecting children as a human rights defenders.
وأنا بشوف إنه هذا النقاش كثير مهم.
And I see this discussion as a really important topic to discuss.
حتى إنه أنا ومجموعتي بفويس مور بمنظمة طفل الحرب عملنا بحث ومقابلات مع الأطفال اللي بالمخيم.
So to a certain point we did some consultation and some interviews, me and my group of 7 females as part of the Voice More program in World Child about protecting children as a human rights defenders.
وحابة أني أقدم لكم 3 أولويات من التحديات اللي بيواجهوها الأطفال المدافعين بالمخيم.
And I would like to present to you 3 priorities that we saw as a group that we wanted to present to you about protecting of the challenges that children human rights defenders are facing.
أول شيء نحن بنقدر الدعم اللي قدمت لنا إياه الحكومة الأردنية والمفوضية السامية لشؤون اللاجئين من مسكن ومشرب وملبس.
We highly appreciate the support as shelter, food and clothes which the Jordanian government provide us with and the UNHCR, and we are most gratitude.
نحن ممتنين لها كثير.
And we're also very grateful.
ولكن ما يزال لدينا بعض المخاوف لعدة أسباب.
But we still have some concerns, and for many reasons, and some of them are.
أول شيء الأطفال المدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان ما بيتم اعتراف عليهم كمجموعات بيمثل باقي الأطفال اللاجئين السوريين. وهذا الشيء بحد من نشاطاتنا نحن كمدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان.
Firstly, children human rights defenders are not recognized in the camp as a group that represent other Syrian children, and this limits our activities and our impact as human rights defenders.
ثاني شيء عدم وضوح آليات الإبلاغ.
Secondly, the lack of clarity of the reporting mechanisms.
كأطفال لاجئين في المخيم ومدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان نحن ما عندنا أي المعرفة الكافية والمعلومات أو لأي جهة مختصة نحن ممكن نروح لحتى تساعدنا ولحتى نطلب المساعدة منها وللمشاكل اللي ممكن نحن تواجهنا خلال عملنا كمدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان.
Secondly, the lack of clarity of the reporting mechanisms. As children and human rights defenders, we do not have sufficient knowledge, knowledge or expertise to ask for assistance from any other side on our issues, and how to face the problems that we face during our work as children and human rights defenders in our community.
ثالث شيء تعليم الأطفال عن حقوقهم وتعليم البالغين عن حقوق الأطفال.
Thirdly, the education of children about their rights and also educating the adults about children's rights.
كمدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان داخل المخيم وأطفال بيعيشوا داخل المخيم بشكل عام ما عندهم المعرفة الكافية عن حقوقهم حتى يستطيعوا الدفاع عنها.
The education of children, we as human rights defenders inside the camp and children also in general in the camp, we do not have the sufficient knowledge about children's rights that will enable us to defend them.
وما عندهمش المعلومات بخصوص القوانين اللي بتحميهم، وهي من أهم المشاكل اللي بيواجهوها كأطفال، إنه ما بيخليهم يستطيعوا يدافعوا عن حقوقهم، حقوق غيرهم.
And we do not know enough about the laws that protect us. And this is one of the most important problems that we face, because we cannot defend our rights without the sufficient knowledge.
وبالنسبة للبالغين مهم كثير إنهم يعرفوا حقوق الأطفال حتى يقدروا يتعاملوا معهم بشكل أسهل.
And for the adults, it's crucial for them to also to know about other children, about children's rights, because that would make it easier between children and adults to work on protecting their rights.
كمان من خلال البحث اللي احنا عملناه عملنا تقرير عن بعض التحديات اللي بتواجه الأطفال المدافعين داخل المخيم، إذا بتحبوا تشوفوا بالاستراحة.
So also, me and my colleagues, we prepared a report that you can find during the lunchtime in the exhibition that has the main challenges that children human rights defenders are facing.
وأنا ومجموعتي في عندنا بعض التوصيات بخصوص التحديات اللي بتواجه المدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان.
And me and our group have recommendations about the challenges that I have mentioned earlier.
إحنا بحاجة إلى تفاهم وتواصل أكبر مع الجهات المختصة بحماية وتمكين الأطفال اللي بيدافعوا عن حقوق الإنسان.
We need a greater understanding and contact with the competent institutions who protect and empower children who defend their human rights.
ونساعد الأطفال اللاجئين اللي بيواجهوا هاي المشاكل.
So we can help the children human rights defenders who are facing such problems.
من أجل أيضا تعليم الأطفال بشكل عام عن حقوقهم، وتكون هاي الجهة حلقة وصل بين الأطفال والمجتمع وتقريب وجهات النظر.
كمان مرة عيدي النقطة بس لو سمحت.
من أجل أيضا تعليم الأطفال بشكل عام عن حقوقهم، وبتكون هاي الجهة حلقة وصل بين الأطفال والمجتمع وتقريب وجهات النظر بينهم.
So we can educate more, like we can be more active in educating more children about their rights, and these component bodies have act as a focal points between the children and the stakeholders on defending children's rights.
وأنا بتمنى إنه العالم كلياته بيسمع لآرائنا وإنه نتاخذ بمحمل الجد.
And we wish that everyone here and outside who are watching us takes us seriously and take our opinions into account.
وأنا بشكر الأمم المتحدة لأنه سمحت لنا كأطفال بالتحدث والتعبير عن رأينا.
And we'd like to thank everyone and the United Nations for giving us the opportunity to be here and speak. Thank you all.
Can I borrow the floor from
sorry,
you?
I was going to synthesize. It's okay.
Okay.
You go ahead.
Just a reminder about the time, because at 1:15 we'll not have any interpretation. So we'd like to please open the floor for questions and answers. Sorry to cut you off.
No problem.
But thank you very much for a very interactive dialogue and for the very concrete recommendations, Haya. Thank you. So we open the floor now for questions. Yes.
Good morning. I am Nicole from Peru. I represent Malaknacht. As my colleague was explaining before what it was about, but I did want to say the following. The situation is very bad for many children, and not only in Colombia or Syria, but in many other places of the world. So that is why, together with other of my colleagues, we would like to, us as children defenders of human rights, we need protection and we need to be able to participate in public affairs. It is also necessary for international organizations and entities, also national ones, to take it into account. Because when we express our opinion is not taken into account on an equal footing. As the peoples we represent, that is millions of working children, the reason is that we see that many people in the world are affected by the situation, and not only children are. And as the members of the committee have said, we have 70 years since we have been created, and we are proning an advancement of the situation in the whole world. So we are claiming as children defenders to be recognized as human rights defenders, because that is what we are. As through our rights as children, we also defend other rights, because adults can also benefit from this. And also, since there are many other children that defend human rights, I would like to take the opportunity to say that it is very important that we not lose contact amongst us. And we could also create a global movement of children defenders. This is pressing. And then the Committee of the Rights of the Child could also benefit from our inputs. We have to continue making progress, and that is my proposal, and I hope it is taken into account. And I would also like to congratulate you all for being here. And Malagnax obviously is very ready to participate in any way possible. Thank you.
I wonder if that requires an answer, but we'll take another question. Do you have other questions?
This one from the back.
Yes, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Yes, thank you very much. Cecido coming from Niger. My question, or rather, my contribution to this discussion concerns the participation, and specifically, for human rights defenders, children human rights defenders. In order to be active, we need information, and more often than not, this information is not accessible to us. Because quite often children are not being taken seriously, but elsewhere, what happens is that children are not even considered as children. I'm thinking of certain areas in Africa where some disabled children as yet do not have any access to education or information or communication. So please, dear children, dear youth and children, human rights defenders, please work so that our world now in the future is different from the past world, so that children are not swept aside, so that all can be considered to have access to the same rights and be considered as equals. Thank you.
Panel, I'd like to know what they feel is the best thing that could be done to help females, young females, protect their rights, particularly in conflict situations such as a camp or the community where she lives. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'll give the floor back to you for answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think this question is very relevant to the panel. And so I will ask Sandra Camila first to answer the question concerning the situation, the female human rights defenders, what can be done to protect female human rights defenders within the context of conflict. And then Haya can follow, and then I think we can close the panel after that.
I'll have to remind you that we have one more minute with translation, but we can stay without translation if you wish.
Yeah. So maybe Sandra first, so
yes,
because with translation, and then here is simultaneous.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. 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 I need to repeat the question. The question, Sandra, Camila, and Heya, is that what can be done to better protect girl, children, human rights defenders in a situation of conflict that you find yourselves in?
Lo que se podría hacer para
In order to protect women or girls who live in conflict situation, is to contribute to awareness raising, especially amongst men, because there are cultural perceptions that, according to which women and men are not equal. Due to this these chauvinist ideas that prevail, we have to have equal opportunities, and unfortunately, in many places we do not have this equality amongst men and women. So, in order to fight for this protection, there should be first equality between men and women, and more work towards awareness raising amongst men to prevent chauvinist approaches. Gracias.
Dr. Camila and Heya, would you want to answer the question too? Okay.
أنا برأيي إنه يكون في جهة مختصة بس لحماية الفتيات المدافعات، مش بس لحمايتهن، كمان يرفعوا الوعي أو يكون في تعليم إلهن كيف يدافعوا عن حالهم، وكمان إنه
In my opinion, I see. In my opinion, I see it would be better if we have a dedicated institution or organization that works with especially females, human rights defenders, on protecting them and following up on their work and what they're doing, and also providing them with education about their rights and educating all the females in the camp about their rights in general.
هو انه يساعدهم ويعلمهم كيف يحموا حالهم، وكمان انه يكون في تعليم مش بس إلهم، تعليم للمجتمع اللي هم عايشين فيه، ومثل ما حكت زميلتي انه يزيد الوعي عندهم بالمجتمعات اللي هم عايشين فيها.
Also to educate them about how to protect themselves, and also awareness raising, and as Sandra Camila also talked about, also increasing awareness and working with the community and the society and raising awareness on such issues.
Sorry, Haya, can I just release the interpreters? Thank you very much for the extra time. Thank you. Appreciate it. Sorry for the interruption, please. Would you like to continue?
No, thank you.
You're done?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. The floor is back. Okay. Thank you. Do you want to say anything? No. I don't know which is your priority. Thank you. Okay. All right. Okay. Should I just close the panel? Yes, the panel. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, to Sandra Camila and to Heya for being here with us. We all know the situations in armed conflict and humanitarian situation is very difficult. And here are two young children, human rights defenders who are really trying to fight for their rights. As a special rapporteur on human rights of internally displaced persons, it's really my privilege to be here with them, and particularly within the context of internal displacement. This year, 2018, is the 20th anniversary of the UN Guiding Principles on Internal Displacement, which provides special protection for children in situations of internal displacement. I would like to take this opportunity to invite all of you to actually visit the photo exhibit, which is just above us. Today is the last day, and there you will find many photographs, including children, internally displaced persons, in camps or outside camps, and where we try to protect their rights and enable them to speak out for their rights as well. Lastly, I also would like to just maybe take this opportunity to announce that as a special rapporteur on human rights of IDPs, my next report to the General Assembly in 2019 will be on the rights of internally displaced children. And this will coincide with the 30th anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So without much ado, many issues have been looked at, very well articulated by Sandra, Camila, and Heya: education, quality of living, environment, protection of children human rights defenders within armed conflict and in camps as well. And I only wish them our best of luck and our continuing support so that they can be enabled to continue to be empowered in organizing themselves as children human rights defenders and reaching out to all of you here so that their voices are heard. Thank you very much to both of you.
At the end of the morning session, I would like to extend a very big thank you for all the speakers. You want to continue a bit? Did you want to respond to any particular question? Okay, yes, please. So Luis will respond to one question, and then I will come back to thanking you.
En español.
Yeah, it's working here. Someone's microphone must be on.
Okay,
It's okay. It's okay now.
Bueno, un poco para poder responder a la pregunta que lanzó la compañera sobre también cómo podemos empoderar a las chicas o a las niñas y adolescentes en estos espacios o a nivel del mundo.
So I would like to answer to the person who was wondering how we can empower the spaces of young people participating worldwide.
Lo importante es que tengamos una educación con igualdad y con equidad entre todas las personas, que se promueva el respeto entre todas las personas.
Very important is to have education for equality for all people and all young people in this world.
Algo importante que está pasando en mi país es que se está jugando la implementación de un enfoque de género para el respeto a todas las personas.
What is very important in my country right now is that there is an issue related to inequality of people.
Y yo sé que en muchas partes del mundo la diversidad cultural a veces nos limita, pero promover una educación sexual integral o un enfoque de género y respeto tendría que también adaptarse a las grandes diversidades culturales.
There needs to be an adaptation to the great cultural diversity because of the differences that exist. Otherwise, the promotion of sexual and reproductive health and rights will not be successful.
Y lo hacemos esto porque no solo luchamos ahora como defensores de derechos por los que estamos ahora, sino por los que vienen en las nuevas generaciones y debería entender un espacio de participación en la que se respeten, no se discriminen y promuevan el amor.
We are working with this because we are thinking about the new generations and we want them to have the space to participate without any discrimination.
Y bueno, solo que como último pedido y que se tome en cuenta, todos los defensores de derechos necesitamos ser protegidos porque estamos expuestos, y ser defensor de derechos humanos es desde que nacemos, el día a día, nuestra vida. No es necesario venir a la ONU, pero es una gran instancia. En nuestras comunidades existen muchos.
So the big last ask that I want to tell you is that all human rights defenders should be respected. And it's not about coming to the UN to speak, it's about the day-to-day life and situations that we encounter.
Y una frase final: nada de nosotros o nosotres sin nosotros. Nada de nosotros sin nosotros.
So the last thing he wants to say, nothing about us without us. Yes.
So thank you very much, Louise. Thank you. And just to end this morning's discussion, I would like to thank all of the speakers in the three panels for engaging us in a very interactive and informative dialogue. Looking forward to see you up in the exhibition and maybe to participate in the side event. Hannah has to rush to go to the side event, so maybe she wants to say thank you.
Yes, I'd just like to say thank you for all coming, and we hope to see you at the next DGD.
Yes.
This call has been disconnected. Thank you for joining.